Welcome to the Dusty Jobs podcast from Imperial Systems. Industry knowledge to make your job easier and safer.
Welcome to another Imperial Systems podcast. Thanks for joining us today. With us today is Charlie Miller. How you doing today, Charlie?
I'm doing just fine. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Charlie is one of our sales engineers here at Imperial Systems, and he has been doing this for, how long have you been doing this now, Charlie?
I started in 1971, so this is my 49th year.
49th year. Now, Charlie is, I would say, he's our most senior and veteran salesperson here and has a lot of knowledge and experience with the industry. And we're here today just to learn a little bit more about dust history, where it's come from, and a little bit about the dust collection industry, a little bit of dust history on that. But Charlie, let's hear a little bit about Charlie's history. Charlie, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you got started in dust collection, or what's your story? Where did this all journey begin for you?
Well, I'm a Pittsburgh boy. I grew up here, and right after I graduated from high school, I moved to Cincinnati, Ohio. And I started work for a company. Actually, it was a large company here headquartered in Pittsburgh that had a very small division in Cincinnati that was their air systems division. And they designed and made building products, ventilation products, roof ventilators, powered louvers, things like that.
Now, what were you doing there? What were you doing for those guys there? What you start out doing?
I started out in the shop. I was in the sheet metal union.
Oh, okay.
And I started on the shop floor. I operated a press brake and a shear.
Yeah.
And spent a lot of time cutting louver blades and forming louver blades.
Still have all your fingers?
I did. Yeah, I was pretty careful about that.
Okay, good.
So, yeah, and I worked for them for, I don't know, maybe I was there for a year and a half, and I'd always liked drafting, and I expressed a desire to join their drafting department. And, they asked me, well, how much drafting experience do you have? And I said, well, I took a couple classes, in high school and things like that. So they said, well, yeah, we do have an opening in drafting and we can put you in there, but we want you to go to the community college and take a few more drafting classes. And I agreed to do that. Mm-hmm. So I started in their drafting department, and I that's actually when I started going to college, by the way, because I was right out of high school when I moved to Cincinnati. So I went to the University of Cincinnati and took a few drafting classes, and I decided I wanted to go on. Mm-hmm. So I got into their engineering program while I was there, and I actually spent 10 years at night college getting my engineering degree.
Oh, wow. So this was while you were working as a draftsman, and then you were doing your education at night.
That's when I started, yes. Anyway, I worked for that company for, about 9 years, and the economy took a downturn, mm-hmm. and I was laid off. So I was laid off for a little while, and I got picked up by another company in Cincinnati, Kirk & Bloom, mm-hmm. which at the time was one of the biggest sheet metal contractors in the nation.
Oh yeah.
There were only a few that were bigger than them, and I think Kirk & Bloom was in the top three. And I started in their engineering department, doing on the board, making system drawings, and up until that time, I didn't know a whole lot about system work. I mean, I didn't know anything.
Right.
So I was fortunate to work with a couple of senior design people who actually taught me the correct way to design dust collection systems.
So you went from just kind of working on parts and pieces of different systems to actually putting the whole system together. That's what you...
That's correct.
Yeah, there you go. So, and that's, I mean, you help us out a lot with that here because...
Well, I try.
Yeah. Well, I know everybody here really appreciates your knowledge and experience in that realm. So we're glad to have you on. And then, so after Kirk and Bloom, did you end up here? Or
Well, while I was with Kirk and Bloom, you know, I don't know how long I worked for them in their engineering department, but we were getting Kirk and Bloom liked to hire internally, okay, and they had at the time I didn't know it, but they had one of their senior sales engineers was he didn't have very good health, and he told them that he was going to retire. So they approached me and asked me if I would be willing to work with this gentleman and start making sales calls with him because they wanted to groom me for a sales position. And I said, "Oh yeah, I'd love to do that." You know, at the time I didn't know that this gentleman was not in good health. You know, I didn't know he was retiring. I didn't know any of that stuff. I just knew I was going to get out and start looking at jobs and help him doing some quoting. So about 6 weeks of that, I found out that I was being promoted into sales, and this gentleman was leaving. But again, with that, I was very fortunate to work with some very, very senior sales engineers that had been in the business for a long, long time. And you know, Kirk and Bloom being the company it was a global company. Because they had sales, we had sales in Europe. I know one of the jobs I worked on was in Saudi Arabia.
Oh wow!
They didn't have plants in the other countries, but they sold everything domestically. But they sold all over the world.
So you've had work that jobs you've sold, jobs you've worked on. It's just everywhere now, huh?
Yeah, a little bit.
That's fun. A little bit of Charlie all over the world.
Well, not really all over the world, but there are a few over there. I mean, I know I have some systems we put in Saudi Arabia for the Air Force Base over there. There's a few other places where I think we sold some equipment that went over to Korea and things like that.
Now, the story I heard about how you came on board with us was that Jeremiah ended up bidding against you on a job and was so impressed with your quote that I think he lost to you. He lost the job to you, and then you ended up coming on board with us. He just kept harassing you to come be a salesman for us. Does that sound about right, or am I?
That's almost correct. Up until the point where you said that Jeremiah lost a job, because Jeremiah did not lose the job.
Oh, he won the job.
He won the job, but that everything else is true. And Jeremiah had somehow saw my quote while he was at the customers, and I don't exactly know how that happened, but he said he got so mad reading my quote that he was going to hire me. Now you got to remember, this was back 10 years ago, and Imperial Systems 10 years ago is not the Imperial Systems we have today.
Yeah.
Jeremiah was Jeremiah was selling. We had another guy here that actually started in the shop and was selling. He wasn't doing systems. He was just selling,
helping out.
Yeah. And then you had Chalmer. Chalmer was selling.
Yeah.
And Jeremiah was just stretched to the limit. He was trying to run his company, and he was the only salesman that was out there traveling.
Right.
And I think he hired me mainly. He wanted to hire me mainly because I think maybe his wife was getting a little upset with him being on the road so much. So he called me at Kirk and Bloom and offered me a position. And his first call, I thought, this is some kind of joke, you know. And I said, yeah, it's just another headhunter, you know. I said,
right.
Yeah, okay, I'll think about it. And then he called me back a second time and asked me about it. And I said, well, I don't know. Let me think about it. I actually brushed him off a couple of times. Mm-hmm. Well, the third time he called me, I said, this guy's really serious. And, at the time, I was actually thinking about early retirement because I really didn't like the direction that Kirk&Bloom was going in. Mm-hmm. The Bloom family had sold the company to Seco, and I just didn't like. I didn't like it after it wasn't a family company anymore. I didn't like the feel.
Yeah.
I didn't like it. It was like the employees didn't really matter anymore.
Right.
So I was actually thinking about retiring, and coming up here to Imperial was like going back home. I did have some things that I had to worry about because my daughters lived with me, and although they were grown, mature adult women already, they still lived in my house, and mm-hmm. I had to make sure they were happy with everything before I agreed to coming up here.
Right.
So we talked it over. My daughter said, "Go for it," and I came up and I met with Jeremiah, and we had a good conversation. And I think I was a little dismayed when I first got here because, let's face it, Imperial Systems wasn't real impressive.
We were a little back then, huh?
The old plant wasn't real impressive, and that was before the expansion.
Right.
So it was really tiny.
Yeah.
But I went in and I met the people, and I liked Jeremiah immediately, especially when I found out he was a bike rider.
Yeah.
So I accepted the position, and I came and worked for him.
And now we're here.
And now we've grown tremendously since I started. It's amazing how much we've grown in 10 short years.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you saying that that's because of you, Charlie?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I give all credit to upper management and the foresight they had to do what they did.
And I think we've put a pretty good team together.
I think we have an excellent team together. Yeah. I think the salesmen we have now on board are very knowledgeable, and they do a really fine job.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, needless to say, that definitely means you have a lot of knowledge in this industry. You have been doing this for a long time, and today what we're really going to dig into now is try to help us understand how this whole thing got started. I mean, dust collection has been around for how long now?
Well, dust collection actually grew up with the Industrial Revolution, which started right after the Civil War. Mm-hmm. Industry started booming in this country. Railroads, mining, oil. Mm-hmm. It just, and especially in this area,
right?
With being the home of the oil industry,
right?
It just companies just started exploding all over the place.
Yeah.
The very first dust collectors that were designed were Cyclones. And the very first Cyclone was designed by a guy named John Finch, I believe his name is, mm-hmm. in 1885.
Wow.
He had a company in New York called the Knickerbocker Company, and it was a textile mill.
Uh-huh.
And he designed the very first Cyclone and patented it for his business. By 1900, Cyclones were widely used everywhere. They were like a staple of the industry.
Yeah.
And that remained, like the best technology that was available up into the early 20s, when the first fabric filter dust collector was designed and patented by a guy in Germany. I think his name was Wilhelm Beth.
Okay.
And he designed the first. He patented 3 designs for shaker dust collectors.
Gotcha. So we're talking. So prior to this, we have the Cyclone, which is basically, I mean, it's just a tube that circulates the air around, and then as it circulates around, the heavy dust falls out the bottom, right? And
Yes.
maybe some particulates, smaller dust makes it back out, but for all the heavy stuff, it flows to the bottom. Then the gentleman from Germany, he took it one step further, right? That's what happened next.
Well, yeah, it was a completely different design.
Oh, okay.
You know, a cyclone works just the way it sounds. You have a little mini cyclone inside that housing.
Yeah.
And the faster the air spins, it throws the dust out until it reaches a vortex point at the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
and then a second spiral turns up the middle and comes out of the top.
Gotcha.
So those cyclones are, they're great for I don't want to say coarse, but down to about 20 microns.
Yeah.
They're pretty efficient.
And they still hold their place in a lot of dust collection today. I mean, we still build them here.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
it's not like it became obsolete. It's just more dust collection came about.
They're good. They're inexpensive dust collection devices where you don't need really, really fine filtration.
Right.
If you're, discharging outside, and I mean, you can't see 20 microns.
Right. That's very small.
But the fabric filter actually brought the dust into a compartment and passed the air through a fabric media
Mm-hmm.
that separated the dust from the airstream, and then the air streamed on the other side of the filters, and then the shakers would shake the dust off, and it would fall down into a hopper to be discharged.
Yeah. Now this is where the term baghouse comes from, right? And this is where baghouse started. And a lot of people still call all dust collectors a baghouse, but this is really where it got started, right?
That's pretty much correct. Yes.
Yeah.
That's where where the term came from.
Yeah, because it's like a house. It's like a housing with looks like a bunch of bags sticking down out of it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
and of course, over the years, his design was improved upon. A lot of people got into the game. You know how many different manufacturers we have for dust collectors. But the filters improved.
Mm-hmm.
They got more media in them. They got finer weaves, things like that, and they just got more efficient.
Yeah.
And then the next evolution of the dust collector was not until the early 1970s.
Okay.
When the first cartridge collector was developed.
Okay.
And a cartridge collector it just took a baghouse dust collector,
Yeah.
replaced the filters, the fabric filters, with a cartridge media.
Okay.
The main advantage, I guess, to the cartridge collector is the filtration is much finer than a baghouse.
So it allows you to get even more dust out of the air.
That's correct. Just like our CMAX filters, it's efficient down to 0.3 microns. That's real small.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like taking fume out of the air. That's very small.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So, and then exactly. Our CMAX is great for fume systems.
Right.
Great for weld smoke or plasma smoke or anything like that. It's a great collector for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so. Who was the first person to actually come up with this whole cartridge idea?
Oh, do you really want me to tell you that?
You can say it. It's all right.
The first cartridge collector was developed by Torrit.
Gotcha.
And they, they're the monster name in the industry.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people still refer to any dust collector with that name. It's kind of like a Kleenex brand.
That's exactly right. They'll say, "Hey, can you come up and look at our turret?" And I'll go and find out it's really something besides a turret.
Right,
You know?
right. And it could be even a baghouse or a Cyclone, and people still call them all turrets.
That's correct.
Yeah,
That's correct.
So, yeah. But sorry, didn't mean to just sidetrack you there. Go ahead, keep going.
That's okay. I'm old. I forgot where we were going. Ask me another question.
Well, we were talking about how the turrets were the first ones to come out with it, but their style was a vertical collector, right, or a horizontal collector. Right?
That's correct. Their style was a horizontal collector, and they still tout that as the best way to arrange them. I disagree.
Yeah.
Because, well, you know how they work. The dust comes down and falls on them and just lays up there, and
right.
they lose 30% of their efficiency right off the bat.
Yeah, because when you stack the filters on top of each other, it cascades down onto the next filter, onto the next filter, onto the next filter before it reaches the hopper. So your top filter goes onto the second filter, onto the third filter until it reaches the bottom. And
yeah, that's correct.
it's a little bit. It does allow you to have a little bit of a smaller footprint, though, whenever you're having it, as far as you can go vertical with it. I know that's one of the differences between that, but after that style came out, after the horizontal style came out on the Cartridge Collector, now we move to a collector style that's a little more like what we have. Is that right?
That's pretty correct.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many people copied turret
Right.
on that horizontal style filter. Ours, of course, is a vertical filter.
Right.
So the dust comes up through the bottom. It doesn't come down on the top. There's no way you lose any filtration surface
Right.
when it's collecting the dust. So I personally, I think that the vertical cartridge is a superior arrangement for the filters.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I was thinking about this too, Charlie. As we talk about as things progress, you said the first bag houses, those were shaker styles, where it actually took the bags and kind of shook them, and that's how they try to knock the dust off them. And even that has changed over the years. Even that style and way of cleaning those cartridges and filters, baghouse filters, that's changed too, right? Because we have a lot of different techniques for that now.
Yeah, most dust collectors today use compressed air.
Right.
They use a tank on their collector that stores compressed air, and they'll have tube sheets that blasts air down into the filters to clean them off.
Uh-huh.
That's the way our CMAX works. That's the way most collectors work today. Now, shakers really are not. I mean, they're still being made,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not as prevalent today as collectors using compressed air.
Right. So even the bag houses are using compressed air these days.
Yes. Now, our BRF uses compressed air, but it has. Our medium pressure BRF uses compressed air,
Mm-hmm.
but it has its own PD pump to provide that. So there's no plant air that's needed to work that.
It's a whole system on its own.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about drawing air out of your system in your plant and drawing away from other things that you're using it for.
There are areas where the baghouse or BRF is a better solution
Mm-hmm.
than a cartridge, and that's some of the things that when we look at a job, we have to see what is the best technology here.
Mm-hmm.
Now our CMAX is always going to be our flagship. That's our number one collector.
Right.
But unlike some of our competitors that make cartridge collectors, they don't have a baghouse to go to.
Right.
They'll push their cartridge collector for anything.
Yeah.
Whereas, Imperial say, well, this application really isn't good for a cartridge collector. We really should look at putting a BRF on it.
Yeah, yeah. And then I've seen too that we get the whole way back to the Cyclone, which was the original, that sometimes it's not just one solution, but you need multiple solutions. And I've seen that too, where a Cyclone will go in front of a baghouse or in front of a cartridge collector, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing. So it's interesting as cartridge collectors and things have changed, that technology is still valid and that idea is still good in certain settings where you'll have that Cyclone and then put it into a baghouse.
You see that a lot in recycling plants, like tire shredders, things like that, where you don't want all that heavy fluff from the tires that are being shredded to go into your filters, because that will clog up a dust collector.
Yeah.
That'll clog up the filter media almost immediately. So we always put a Cyclone in front of our BRF on recycling jobs.
So that's like a pre-filter almost. It helps with the heavy dropout on that, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
It gets the bulky stuff out of the airstream, so that only the fine dust, and we've already talked about it. A Cyclone is not really, a high efficiency filtration system, but it is good to remove the bulky stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the finer dust can go out of the top and go through our more efficient dust collectors.
Yeah. So Charlie, here's my question now. So we've talked about where dust collectors have come from, and you've seen a lot of progression through the years. And we like to think that, well, we quite often say that right now the C-Max is pretty state of the art. We've done a lot of things to it to make it a great dust collector that has a lot of features and benefits. Where do you think the future of dust collection? Well, actually, we forgot a whole subject.
What was that?
Well, now we got into explosive dust more recently. That's been the latest.
That's true.
In dust collection, and you've been in the industry during that time frame where it's really become a concern, right?
Yeah. Well, the whole thing about the safety. I mean, we can go back before that. The first dust collection systems weren't really designed with worker safety in mind, or really the environment in mind. They were more just to make somebody's process more profitable.
Right.
And it really wasn't until 1970 that we had OSHA, or the EPA, which are both government agencies that oversee worker safety in OSHA, and the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency that protects the environment. And those were the two big laws that were passed that really helped our industry, because companies were now being forced to worry about workers' health and keeping a clean environment for them, and in an area that was safe.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the EPA. The environment, people before the EPA was just dumping stuff outside, right into the environment.
Yeah.
So those two laws themselves helped tremendously. And then the third thing that came along was the concern about today's concern about explosion prevention, and that's got more stringent over the year. And what triggered that was the Imperial System explosion in 2008.
Yeah, the Imperial Sugar.
Imperial Sugar.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was quite the explosion.
Yeah. Well, we had explosions all along, but it was never thrust into the forefront of the American people.
Right.
I mean, flower plants exploded all the time.
Right.
But until they, that explosion, when they saw 14 people dead and over 40 injured. Yeah. Then they decided something had to be done.
Right.
And that's when they started making the NFPA guidelines more than guidelines. And the NFPA laws came on, and you had to be compliant, and it keeps getting
It keeps getting better for the worker.
Yes.
Which creates a better environment, and in the end, that's good for everybody.
Yeah. And the newest legislation that's out there now is, requiring people to have a dust evaluated, or
dust hazard analysis.
And
which we've talked about on here. So if you guys aren't familiar with dust hazard analysis, go back, listen to one of our previous episodes where we have that information. You can check that out. So, but sorry, keep going, Charlie.
So, yeah, I mean, it's just things are going to keep progressing. And, you know, I mean, the laws are going to change. You know, something's going to come around where, you know, they got to do something else. And the EPA guidelines are actually laws, I guess. They change every couple of years. They revise it and change something on it. So
yeah, they're always trying to make it safer, make it better for the worker, and that's one of our missions here too.
Absolutely,
we're trying to create a healthy environment for those people, and I think the future of our company is to continue to try to do that with any innovation and any way we can do that. So,
and you can just look at our product line, and you know, like the fact that we've done all the stringent testing we've done on our collector, and you know, we have the Rhino drum now, and you know, all the options we have for keeping our equipment safe from an explosion.
Yeah.
So these are things that are important. You know, if you have a catastrophic failure someplace, and one of your employees is maimed or killed, I mean, what's it going to cost to? I mean, you can't put a cost to that. You can't put a price to that.
Right.
So, you know, the explosion stuff is very, very important, and almost all the dusts are you know, explosive these days. You know, unless you got rock.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and it's always good to have that tested and checked to make sure that you know what you're dealing with, and to help create a safe environment for those who are working.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So is that where you see the future of dust collection going? To continue with safety and.
Actually, no. I think somewhere eventually they'll develop a transporter that'll take the dust and just zap it someplace into space. You know.
There you go. Straight out of the building.
Hey, now you know my Star Trek background.
There you go. So, well, Charlie, thanks for coming on. Thanks for giving us your knowledge. Thanks for sharing your past experience in your own life and your past experience with dust collection. And I just want to say, if anybody has any questions or anything else, maybe we'll try to have Charlie on again to answer some questions. You can always email them to us. And thanks for listening, and we'll catch up with you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Dusty Jobs podcast. Breathe better, work safer.